Welcome to Grace Stories. This is Garrett from Grace Community Church. So glad that you guys are here watching this. I have the extreme pleasure of sitting down and talking with Terrence Gibson, former classmate together, choir buddy, and Terrence is currently working on a PhD at Liberty University and a chaplain at Jane Phillips Hospital. And so I just thought it would be cool to get Terrence in, have some conversations about what some of the things he's been going through right now in the midst of a lot of crazy stuff. And so to just start off, Terrence, is there anything that you would like to say?
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on this show. As you said, I work at Jane Phillips, and I am a chaplain. I served in that capacity during this COVID crisis.
Mm-hmm.
It was certainly interesting serving as a chaplain during a pandemic,
Yes,
which nobody living today has ever experienced or worked through. So it was interesting changing my paradigm of ministry as a chaplain and serving families who were experiencing grief and suffering and sadness in a unique way that I've never experienced.
Yeah.
So
how did you become a chaplain? And, what was that process like? How long have you been doing it now? And, if you could have looked back when you first started doing this work, with this unique ministry, would you have ever thought that you would have had to provide a level of spiritual, pastoral care to people in such a unique way, given a lot of the difficulties or the unusual circumstances that people have had to deal with during all of this?
Well, I got into chaplaincy through a CPE program, which is a clinical pastoral education that was offered at the seminary at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I had no ambitions to be a chaplain. But through the work, I realized that I had some skills and some talents that may be useful in that setting. And I realized that I enjoy the work very much. Now, to answer your second question, I had no idea, and nobody had any idea that 2020 was going to be the year that that the world is on fire, metaphorically.
Yeah.
And that hospitals would be shutting down, and in the sense of nobody in, nobody out except for essential staff. And it changed the dynamic of what I do and who I speak to. And it added a sense of urgency. And so, no, but I've learned some things about myself through the process.
Yeah.
I've learned that I am doing what God is supposed to be, that God wants me to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, and I've learned that being the hands and feet of Jesus doesn't stop just because there's a pandemic.
Yeah.
That
Yes.
people still need to have hope, that people still need to hear that someone cares for them. And everyone has a story, which is the purpose of this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And what's cool about my job is I get to listen to people's stories.
Yes.
Where they come from, who they are, what makes them unique. And so, and it's really cool. There are some challenges, but yeah.
So you've been doing the chaplaincy for a while. There's probably a lot of things that for who knows how long is kind of routine when it comes to doing that kind of work, and then all of a sudden you have a lot of these stipulations, whether it's how many people are allowed in a room to do visitations, or maybe who's allowed into certain areas of the hospital. So, given some of those circumstances, what What was some of the things that were similar in the work that you were doing? What were some of the things that didn't change? You don't think will probably ever change, but what are some of the things that you had to learn to do differently? Some of the ways that you had to learn how to adapt to the situations and the hand you were dealt.
Well, one of the things that changed was, like all churches have changed and all ministries have changed, was in order to mitigate risk, some of my chaplaincy work went into phone conversations with families, which, I've had some experience with that, but it definitely was heavier on phone conversations with individuals and with family members, and it changed the way I thought about ministry or chaplaincy, because I'm at the bedside with a patient and with family, and we're talking, and pastoral care is happening live and present. But sometimes that was just not a reality due to stipulations through hospitals across the nation, not just ours. So not just myself, all chaplains and all practitioners and all doctors and nurses who would normally, under normal circumstances, be able to speak with family members, suddenly had to call family members. And so that was the new thing. But what stayed the same was genuineness. The fact that we still care, the fact that, and as an Ascension hospital, we're a Christian organization, so pastoral care is something that they really emphasize strongly. We emphasize strongly. So it was, we're still carrying out the mission, the healing ministry of Jesus Christ, and it was still significant, even though it was on the phones. Other mediums, but that stayed the same. Was the fact that we still care and we are still here, and so those are the things that changed and stayed the same.
So given that you're having to shift to do more things over the phone, or I know some people have utilized technology in a different way. Was it difficult to be able to interact with a family, especially if their loved one, whether it's a spouse or a child or a grandparent, was it difficult to be able to have maybe the hard conversations with them when you don't have maybe it's something like a facial cue, or to be able to hear the tone of their voice, or to be able to have the family come together, and losing something like touch or anything like that, to be able to connect with them in that way, losing the connection that people have when they're like this face to face. How were you able to kind of navigate that, and was that something that you kind of noticed right away, losing some of that face to face interaction?
Yeah, it was certainly different. Certainly ministry over the phone is different than ministry in person. You're exactly right. I can see you, I can read your face, I can read your body language, and that does make it more personable, but doesn't necessarily make it less significant.
Yes.
And given the constraints and our reality, it was all we had. And I think people were understanding, and it made it different, but certainly it was, and in some cases it was much more significant, because, I can sit on a phone call and I can hear you and I can listen to you, and and sometimes some people do better on the phone, than in person. Sometimes it can be daunting to be standing in front of sometimes it can be that power differential, me standing with you as a chaplain, and so different, but not better, not worse, just different.
Yeah, it makes me think, because you bring that up, and I've thought about that as well for people who, have connected with us because of what we've been able to do online, or what we've been, having to do out of necessity online. They're getting to experience, our church, our values, and our mission in a way that's unique, and that they may not have done if they would have had to come into the building and walk through those doors and sit down and then talk to us, shake our hands, because they're having to be vulnerable in a different way, when they're coming into the building face to face, than rather being in their own home, in their own comfort zone, especially when they don't know us. Because I know, for you, I'm just assuming that a lot of, people that you're interacting with, you don't have, the luxury of having that, connection, that relationship with someone. And so sometimes, I can imagine these people that you're trying to provide care for, you're also talking to for maybe the first or the second time. And so, for some of those people out there that, really don't want to, learn ways to utilize the technology they have, or to utilize the tools that are at their disposal to do whatever it is, any aspect of their job, or if they have a ministry, or, if it's even the way that they, interact with their household. What would you say to those people that say, well, it's like, because like you said, it's not better, it's not worse. What would you say to the people that are probably going to be on the other side of this, saying, no, it can't be the same, it's got to be different? What do you say to those people?
Do you want the TV answer, or do you want the real answer?
Whatever you're comfortable sharing.
I would say be authentic.
Yeah.
If you are inauthentic, it will show. If you got into ministry to stand before crowds and to be the savior, it's showing. And I think one of the benefits of the COVID crisis, and I put that in parentheses because there's been a lot of tragedy. But one of the good things that have come from that is it shows people's hearts and real ministerial intent. So I've had pastors, friends. I'm from Oakland, California originally, who've hated that their doors were closed, and but that's the only ministry paradigm that they've experienced and know and understand. So once that was taken away from them, they were left with nothing, because what do you mean? It's only virtual. The pastors who've embraced it with authenticity and their true selves, and really checked on the members, and have been active and still been their authentic selves. And by authentic selves is you're not trying to be fake. You're not trying to be a televangelist. They've done well with the virtual and phone call ministry, because I think it shows.
Yeah.
If you still care carries through virtual means. That has been evident, and if people don't care, it shows as well. If I'm more concerned about this structure and me having a 500 member service and it just being a wonderful time. But on the flip side of that, if my pastor's been calling me weekly because he hasn't been seeing me, it's benefited some in some ways, and some have got to connect in ways that were not possible. And some churches have learned new paradigms. I myself, on a personal note, have learned new paradigms that are going to keep with me, that are going to stay with me my entire ministry. So, yeah, I would say be authentic, be true to yourself. Don't be a phony, because it will show itself every single time in authenticity.
Yeah. So, kind of moving from that and thinking about, let's say that you're providing that that care for someone in the hospital that's sick and struggling, thinking about providing care for their families while they're still present. What was difficult? What were some of the challenges for some of those patients where unfortunately they weren't able to make it, or they weren't able to pass on with people in the room present with them? How was that challenging, not only for them or for you or their families?
I think it was one of the things for me was seeing the hospital staff grieve in different ways. Um, as I said, ordinarily we're all there in person, and we're able to have the physical touch and connection. Sometimes we're able to be physically present, but especially during the height of that was just not possible. But even though that wasn't possible, still picking up the phone and saying, we are here for you, went a long way, in my opinion. And again, I go back to that authenticity. I'm not trying to be fake. I'm not trying to be phony. This is who we are. And, it went a long way.
Yeah. So, in the midst of all of it, what are some of the things that you think you'll do differently, or some of the specific things that you will think about that you maybe weren't thinking about before? When you're walking into a room and this is all said and done, and people are there again, and we can be present, what are you going to be thinking about that you weren't thinking about before?
I'm going to be thinking about the people who can't be in that space. Maybe family members who, for whatever reason, can't be there because they themselves are sick or halfway across the world. And I'm going to be thinking about that a lot more. Sometimes when you're there, you just think about what's the people that is in the room. I've got patient and I've got family members, and these are the people I'm ministering to. But one life can affect people. My mother lives in California, so if she were to pass away suddenly, me being in Oklahoma, my family, I still have siblings in California, so if there was a chaplain there, they could benefit from, that ministry. But I myself, 1,500 miles away, wouldn't be able to benefit from that. Now I'm thinking about new ways that I could, possibly provide pastoral care to those, or at least offer it to those family members who are away, who are not there, and that their grief still matters too, even though they're not in that physical space. So that's one of the takeaways for me, was that it's not everyone in that space that is only grieving. I know we knew that, cognitively, but sometimes it takes it to settle, in your spirit, and if at all possible, we need to be sensitive to that too. So yeah.
Yeah. So in the midst of it, at the peak of this, and even thinking about what if something like this happens again, are there certain challenges that you think that you'll face, or that your family faces, thinking about you being in the middle of potentially dangerous situation, being with people who have something, a sickness or a disease that there's no cure for? How did that, or how do you think that will affect the way that your family interacts with you?
Well, all you can do is be careful. it's all around us. It wasn't just limited to the hospital building, which is why we shut down not just hospital buildings, but the entire country virtually. So all we can do is be careful and be prayerful. I've never been one who's lived in fear of going to be catching this, but I've never been one who's also disregarded CDC guidelines of wearing masks in public places and ignoring social distancing rules. I think it was a balance for me and my family and my wife, who's the light of my life, really, in a lot of ways. Helped me with some of those fears, because in the beginning I was like, oh, we gotta wear these masks, and oh, this and oh that, and we gotta wash our hands 40 times a day, and my hands were chapped, cracked, and bleeding. I couldn't wash them anymore. They just. But as the days went by, I trust that God is going to take care of me. But I don't want to be ridiculous and not take common sense protocols. So yeah, it was. I was never in fear that my family was going to get it, or that I myself was going to get it, or I think Walmart is kind of ground zero for. I think I was more fearful of going into Walmart than I was going into the hospital of catching the, hospitals. They have, they have a lot more procedures and absolutely. Walmart is like, it's open season
for all.
Like somebody's coughing over there while you're trying to check out. It's like, yeah.
I appreciate you saying it in that way, because I think early on a lot of people thought, well, if I do do X, Y, or Z, or if I let someone else dictate what I'm doing, then I'm not trusting in God, or I'm living in fear, or any of the you hear those buzzwords. I think it's important to recognize I can be mindful, and I can, stop and listen to what people are saying around me, and what, the situations are, and try and discern, how many times do I need to wash my hands, or, where do I need to be, going or doing. And I think, for any situation that we can find ourselves in this country, whether it's a sickness or whether it's, any kind of situation, I think it's important to, like you said, first, like, you trust in God that He's going to be in control of all of it. But then also, remembering that there are people, that there are experts that understand the reality of situations, and you have to be able to find that balance of, what am I going to do? How am I going to operate given these situations? And so I appreciate, the fact that you, first of all, honest about, because I was the same way when all this first started. I probably drove my wife nuts because I was constantly monitoring how much she touched her face, and I had my hands were in my pocket. I was not gonna do anything like that. But I think, easing up on that a little bit, and realizing, okay, well, what is the reality of the situation, and ultimately giving it over to God, and saying, I'm trusting in you. To keep me safe, and to, be present in all these situations. And so, I think that's something that, as this potentially continues, or if it gets worse, or hopefully gets better, or if there's something else that happens like this down the road, for anyone listening, I just urge you to do the same, to, trust that God has control over it, and to not live in fear, but to also, to be thoughtful, and to just really listen to what's going on, and to be able to think through it, and just use common sense when it's needed.
And I'd like to add too that if you are living in fear, it's okay. There's nothing wrong with fear. Fear is an emotion, just like happiness and sadness, and there's nothing wrong with experiencing an emotion, especially in a pandemic. There's nothing wrong with being in fear. You're not less of a Christian because you have fear. You're not less of a believer or anything if you're living in fear, because fear is a reality. I think where I try to draw the line is I try not to let fear be the only thing that motivates my behavior. That if I have fear, I recognize it. Oh, well, I'm fearful, and I try to be logical with the process. Because I think there was a certain sentiment that we just need to negate all of our fear. We need to negate that. No, at least in my opinion, you don't have to negate the fear. In some instances, it's okay to have a healthy fear. I don't want to walk across Highway 75, with those big semis. That's a healthy fear. So, I'm careful about that emotion, because it is an emotion that is real, and it's there to protect us in a lot of instances. But when you feel the need to be fearful, or if you are fearful, take a step back and say, why am I fearful? Am I fearful because this is, I'm at greater risk, because there are some people at greater risk for this virus, and so I affirm people's fears without always affirming the behavior that follows the fear, because fear is a real emotion, and there's a lot of people, Christians alike, that have very real, reasonable fears of this virus, and I affirm them.
Yeah, and I'm sure, there were a lot of people that you were working with, that were, sick, whether or not, it's this virus. Maybe it's something else. It's a, an upcoming procedure, or, a bad diagnosis. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who, at the intersection of a difficult situation, they have those emotions. They have different emotions, whether it's, fear, anger, and, I can imagine that it's probably not the best practice to dismiss the emotions that those people are going through, but to help them work through that.
To sit with them. It's never my job as a chaplain, and even it's carried on into my pastoral ministry, to fix people. That's God's work. That's a theological view of mine, and it's carried over into my practice. I try not to correct people's fears, or any type of emotion, or anybody's happinesses or joys. My job is just to witness it, and to affirm the humanity that's there. At least that's how I view it, and it's carried over into my pastoral ministry. Somebody said something to me, and said, Pastor, I'm really scared about this. My job is not to tell them you shouldn't be scared. Everything's gonna be all right. My job is to say, wow, what's your heart telling you about this situation? Or I affirm your fears, and I affirm who you are, and I part of it is active listening. At least is my paradigm, because normally people will arrive to conclusions themselves, and all they needed to hear, all they really needed was somebody to be physically present, or in our case, virtually present over the phone, to process it. And I'm glad to be that conduit to help people process their emotions, whatever their emotions is, whether it's happiness, whether it's grief, whether it's overwhelming guilt, or whatever the case may be. What's cool about what I do is I get to hear that, and I get to affirm the humanity that's there, and I think that's cool.
Yeah. It makes me think about, a lot of interactions that Jesus would have had with followers, whether they were the disciples or not. You know, there were moments where they had an emotional response to something going on, whether it was the way Jesus interacted with another person, or, you know, the way that he, you know, just loved or cared for the people that didn't normally get that care and love. And instead of trying to, you know, tell them what to do, he walks through it with them, and he's, you know, trying to help them realize, you know, what they, you know, what their, you know, underlying heart is, and come to those conclusions on their own, and to be able to grow in a way that's not me dictating, you know, well, this is just, here's a 5-step plan for how you need to, you know, to walk through this situation, or how you need to respond differently, but to be able to actually experience personal growth in an organic, healthy way.
Absolutely. I think about the road to Emmaus, you know, how they walked alongside Jesus and didn't know that it was him. You know, in a lot of ways, that's kind of my paradigm. You know, I don't want to be overly religious, or I just want to be present.
Yep.
People don't need you to fix them, and oftentimes people don't want you to fix them. You know, sitting with somebody, the ministry of presence, learned in CPE, and certainly is translated into chaplaincy, is so powerful, because simply being there with somebody means the world. And you know, I tear up when I think about it, because the world is starving for somebody to just be there. Just don't judge me. Don't have any. Don't medicate me. Don't try to do spiritual surgery on me. Don't preach to me. Don't tell me I'm going to hell. Don't tell me that. Don't correct my theology. You know, just be here with me.
Yeah. I think, you know, that's huge, especially, you know, in this day and time. You know, if I'm with someone, if I'm trying to, you know, if I genuinely love them, you know, my first inclination should be, you know, just being present and being able to listen to what they're going through. You know, I would never want my immediate response. And I think sometimes it ends up becoming our first response is, well, how can I fix this situation? You know, for me personally, that's something that I really struggle with a lot, because I love to fix things. And sometimes I treat people like that. And it's, well, how can I make them feel better? How can I make their life better, or whatever it is? And I don't actually acknowledge, you know, the struggles they're going through. I don't acknowledge their history. You know, and I don't allow them to really, you know, just share their heart, you know, regardless of what they believe, or, you know, where they came from. And, you know, for people that are experiencing, you know, profound levels of grief in such a hard, different, unique way in times like this, I think that, you know, what my first inclination should be is just to hear what they have to say, and to be able to learn more about them as a person, especially for those people that you don't have a relationship with. And I can only imagine, you know, in a hospital setting, and in this day and age, there are a few people, probably more so in a place like Bartlesville, Oklahoma, who, you know, are believers, but I'm sure there's plenty of people that aren't. And so, you know, I appreciate what you said, you know, not trying to, you know, dissect them, or to fix them, or to show them the right way to think or act, or anything like that. And so, you know, I think that can carry over into lots of different areas of life.
Absolutely. Are you trying to fix people because of your own biases, of your feeling the need to fix them, or you? I mean, you have to constantly be checking yourself as well. Why do I feel the need to fix this person?
Mm-hmm.
And am I the arbiter for all the fixes for everybody in their life? And I think that's arrogant. Some people, certainly, I can affirm myself that I had that view of pastoral ministry prior to chaplaincy. Is I'm the preacher. I'm the one who has the answers to everyone. You just need to listen to me, and if you listen to me, you're going to be all right.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm the spiritual clinician in this setting, and I have the answers that you don't have.
Mm-hmm.
And God really had to humble me and say, no, you really don't.
Mm-hmm.
But here's what you can do. You can be there. And no judgment, no condemnation, no no need to fix. Good or bad theology, which is relative to maybe what I'm feeling at the moment.
Yeah.
Or my own biases, my own presuppositions. Because when you walk into any space, you bring yourself and all of your baggage, all of your hurt, all of your pains into that space.
Mm-hmm.
And even in pastoral ministry, it's helped me. When I'm talking to a parishioner, I'm talking to them from my view. I'm a black boy from Oakland, California. Was raised with one of 5 kids that grew up impoverished in gang-infested areas, and so when I listen to somebody, share their heart here, sometimes I'm like, I come through it from my worldview, and sometimes it's difficult to detach Terrence from the situation and just let me be a conduit, a soundboard of sorts. And to leave Terrence's, there's nothing wrong with Terrence's biases or presuppositions. It makes me who I am. But when I walk into a room or when I speak to anybody in any type of pastoral way, I have to leave that at the beginning of the conversation. And that's difficult because we are who we are. Garrett's been through what Garrett's been through. His experiences are your experiences, and those are wonderful experiences. But sometimes what people don't need, in my opinion, is us to be projecting ourselves into their lives. Sometimes what, in my opinion, what people need is just a sounding board, just to listen. Just to be there. And sometimes I've had conversations pastorally, even before I became a chaplain. Just listen. Didn't say a word. And it's been cathartic. It's been a process of where people can process their hurts and pains. That image of walking alongside is powerful. And I think, in my arrogant opinion, if a lot of pastors would adopt that philosophy, I think we'd be a lot stronger advocates for people's well-being. So, I forgot the question. I've just been babbling.
No, you're fine. Going off of that, and this may be one of the last questions I have for you. When you feel like those moments or those days where you walk into a situation and you're caring for someone who's hurting in whatever way it is, and you try to take yourself out of the equation as much as you can, and now all of a sudden all that's left is and you kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, but all that's left really is God and what God is going to be able to do in that person's heart or in that person's life. What makes those different than the moments where maybe there's too much Terrence?
Well, I'm going to speak frankly here. Usually the moments that Terrence feels good about the conversation, at the end of it, Terrence did a terrible job. Because Terrence said what was on his mind, and that may or may not have been what is appropriate in the moment. I think back to some of the ministry advice that I've given people through the years, And I think back and I say, gee, that was terrible advice. I was really projecting what I felt about a situation, may have been similar or different, or how I felt about what they were going through, which may or may not have been appropriate at the time. And it caused some damage because I wasn't thinking about what they were experiencing. I was thinking about how I was processing it and how I was going to respond to what they were saying. So how Terrence responds to situations that are that I try to remove myself as much as possible. It creates space for them to be who they are and to affirm whatever is there, good or bad. It's not my job to fix it. It's not my job to interpret it. It's not my job to analyze it. It's my job to just be there. And that has carried, as I said before, into my personal private pastoral ministry when friends have come to me in private and have asked me for advice, which I still don't know to this day why people are asking me for advice about anything. They don't know how jacked up I am. If they knew how jacked up I was, they wouldn't ask me for advice. But really, Terrence tries to divorce himself from Terrence in a moment, in those moments. And even here, this is challenging to me because Terrence is talking about Terrence, and Terrence doesn't normally. I'm talking about myself in the third person. I don't normally talk about myself and what's going on. I normally process that in private and in prayer time and reflection and personal meditation. So even now it's a challenge to talk about it because it's like, wow, okay, I have an opportunity to talk about what's on my heart. And, the same way that like you've given me this platform, I try to give people a platform to share their heart and try not to bring Terrence's baggage, because if I've had a rough day or a rough night or had some bad news, you can carry that into a room or into a pastoral encounter, and you can do a lot of damage. And so checking yourself at the door, and it's different for everybody. Some people do it extremely well naturally. I wasn't one of those people who did it extremely well naturally. I had to really work on my biases and my presuppositions and checking myself at the door. And even now, I can't say that I do it perfectly. I have no idea, but I know that's the intent. That's what I try to do. So yeah, that's how it's different. It's less of Terrence and my will and how I think things are supposed to be going, and that's different because when I was in full-time ministry, I felt like, well, this is what I should be doing, and this is what I think, and it didn't matter what anybody else thought. But now that I can take a step back and reflect on it, I'm saying, I say that, well, had I checked myself at the door and my baggage at the door, not that that's being inauthentic. You're still Terrence. You're still Garrett. But I would have done less damage in a lot of situations. And, so, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's really good. It's something that, I think it should be a struggle for all of us to kind of want to step aside or put aside our ego or whatever else is getting in the way when we're dealing with anyone, any kind of relationship or interaction with people, and it's a challenge to be able to say I'm gonna try and check my own biases or my own issues that I'm dealing with so that I can, be there and be what I need to be for this person. And I think, just based off what you said, the thing that comes to me is, the less I'm trying to put myself into that situation, the more I'm allowing God to do work. Because I say this sometimes, for anything that I do, Sometimes one of these days maybe I'll know, but how much is God doing, through me versus how much is God doing in spite of me.
Yeah. And that's a good point, because there still can be some good pastoral care and pastoral leadership that happens regardless of how we conduct ourselves. 'Cause certainly I've had pastors in the past that weren't always cognizant and really didn't care about nobody else's view but their own, but still God was able to use them in mighty ways. So it's definitely a continuum, but certainly what I found to be most effective and most life-giving and affirming is allowing myself the room to where when I'm listening to people, not to be checking their own concerns, their concerns and their worries with my own.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I'm not living myself vicariously through them and trying to fix them with my baggage. And so it's been powerful. And, and God can move in spite of you. Mm-hmm. That is very true, and I think that's been the story of my life. But my desire has been to move along with God and try to be in tune with Him, whatever way that might present itself. And certainly, in this racial climate and everything that's going on, there's a lot of tension. There's a lot of worry. There's a lot of anxiety. Even as things start to open up, everyone is asking, well, what is next? How do we move from here? Churches, who have never done this before, are asking the same question. Hospitals are asking, how do we move forward? Families, some of which have been displaced because of this crisis, are asking what's next. And what's cool about what I do is I can witness and sit there and listen as people process and pick up the pieces of their life. And excuse me. So yeah, I'm sorry.
You're good. That's a good note to think, and as we, as a nation, as a world, you're fine. As we continue to go through, all of these different situations and circumstances, as difficult as they might be, or as challenging, maybe unanticipated, to step aside and just think about it, think about what's going on, and to just remember that, whatever it is, anything it is, it's a process, and it takes time, and sometimes it might not be easy, and for anyone listening, just, continue to do that, to stop and think and, hear what people have to say, to realize that we're all going through, situations or trauma or issues, and that we're all trying to, figure out how we can put things back together again and hopefully make them better than they were before, and to come out stronger. And so, just kind of thinking about that, Terrence, is there anything else as we kind of start to wrap up that you'd like to say?
No, I thank you for the opportunity, and I pray that something has been said to encourage somebody and uplift someone's spirit, and maybe enlighten someone about the need to engage in self-care, and so appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, as I said, you and I go way back in college, and certainly we're friends, and I thank you for that.
Yeah, well, thank you again for taking the time out of your day to come here and just share a little bit of your heart and talk about, some of the stuff that you've witnessed, that you've gone through. And yeah, I really hope that plenty of people get to see this and get to, hear a little bit of this, and maybe they can take some of this, and translate it into something in their life, into their workplace or their family or any situation they're dealing with. Just thank you again. And for those of you listening, if you want to find more things like this, you can find us on social media at GCC Bartlesville. All of our handles are GCC Bartlesville. Website is gccbartlesville.org. We are trying to build out this particular platform. Currently, you can watch it on YouTube, or you can listen on Spotify, Google Podcasts, a lot of other podcast platforms. Hopefully more coming in the future with more of these conversations. So just comment things you want us to hear, want to hear us talk about, more people you want us to talk to, and if you like this, just share it with your friends, family, and we will get to talk to you again next week.